The United States military detonated a thermonuclear bomb 250 miles above the Pacific Ocean. This event occurred on July 9, 1962, under a classified program named Starfish Prime. The blast was 100 times larger than the Hiroshima bomb. It created an artificial radiation belt that disabled 1/3 of all low Earth orbit satellites. Subscribe before you go further. This is the kind of video that gets buried. The government hid the full damage for decades. Earth experienced an unnatural aurora that lit skies across thousands of miles. The Cold War was moving into the upper atmosphere. In 1958, the United States discovery of the Van Allen belts changed military strategy. Dr. James Van Allen, a physicist at the University of Iowa, discovered these natural rings of intense radiation surrounding Earth. He confirmed they trap highly charged particles from the sun. The military viewed these radiation belts as a potential defensive shield or a weapon. They wanted to know if a nuclear blast could alter the magnetic field of the planet. This was not a small test. It was an attempt to rewrite the physics of near-Earth space. Public history focus covers the Cuban Missile Crisis and underground tests. But the true frontier was 250 miles up. This is not fringe history. This is 60 years of unbroken documented record. The military launched rockets from Johnson Island, a tiny coral atoll in the Pacific Ocean. They called the wider Operation Project Dominic. It involved 31 separate nuclear detonations. Starfish Prime was the largest. Dr. Jonathan McDowell, an astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, spent years documenting early space launches. He concluded that the high-altitude tests permanently altered the space environment for years. The public was told these tests were harmless scientific trials. They believed space was too vast damage. The reality was different. The military detonated a 1.4 megaton warhead right inside the ionosphere. This is a layer of Earth's atmosphere that reflects radio waves. The energy release was immense. It created a massive EMP, an electromagnetic pulse that fried electronic systems on the ground. The United States military altered the upper atmosphere of our planet without knowing the permanent consequences. Before we go further, drop your answer in the comments right now. Do you believe a government should have the right to test weapons that affect the global environment? I read every comment, and this one is going to split the room. Honolulu, July 9th, 1962. It is 11 p.m. A hotel worker cleans tables on a rooftop terrace. The night sky over Hawaii is dark and calm. Hundreds of miles away, on Johnson Island, a single button is pressed. An invisible line of fire cuts upward into the dark. It carries a nuclear warhead. Then the sky breaks. A flash of bright green light fills the horizon. The dark night turns into local noon within 1 millisecond. The white-hot light transforms into a dark red glow that bleeds across the sky. The air crackles with static electricity. On the streets below, streetlights flash twice and go completely dark. Air raid sirens do not sound. The silence makes the flash terrifying. This moment is recorded by Dr. Cecil E. Leith, a theoretical physicist at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. He stands on a volcanic peak in Maui, watching through heavy glass filters. His hands trace the massive shockwave expanding through the thin air. He watches a man-made fireball expand across 250 miles of empty space. The natural world ceases to look natural. The upper atmosphere turns into a sea of burning gas. In the city, telephone lines go dead. Radar systems at the airport freeze. Hotel guests run onto balconies to view the artificial sun. They do not know they are looking at a nuclear explosion. They feel a strange, quiet panic. The world behaves in a way it never has before. The physical data from that night remains chilling. The radiation sensors on early satellites spike instantly. The needles lock at maximum capacity. The human witness accounts match the data perfectly. The military successfully ignited the sky. Honolulu, July 9th, 1962. It is 11 p.m. A hotel worker cleans tables on a rooftop terrace. The night sky over Hawaii is dark and calm. Hundreds of miles away, on Johnson Island, a single button is pressed. An invisible line of fire cuts upward into the dark. It carries a nuclear warhead. Then the sky breaks. A flash of bright green light fills the horizon. The dark night turns into local noon within 1 millisecond. The white-hot light transforms into a dark red glow that bleeds across the sky. The air crackles with static electricity. On the streets below, streetlights flash twice and go completely dark. Air raid sirens do not sound. The silence makes the flash terrifying. This moment is recorded by Dr. Cecil E. Leith, a theoretical physicist at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. He stands on a volcanic peak in Maui, watching through heavy glass filters. His hands trace the massive shockwave expanding through the thin air. He watches a man-made fireball expand across 250 miles of empty space. The natural world ceases to look natural. The upper atmosphere turns into a sea of burning gas. In the city, telephone lines go dead. Radar systems at the airport freeze. Hotel guests run onto balconies to view the artificial sun. They do not know they are looking at a nuclear explosion. They feel a strange, quiet panic. The world behaves in a way it never has before. The physical data from that night remains chilling. The radiation sensors on early satellites spike instantly. The needles lock at maximum capacity. The human witness accounts match the data perfectly. The military successfully ignited the sky. What comes next is harder to dismiss. The blast changed space forever. The initial explosion faded after several minutes, but the true damage was invisible and long-lasting. The first sub-revelation surprised the scientists. The explosion created a brand-new, artificial radiation belt around the Earth. The intense bursts of energy forced high-energy electrons into the Earth's magnetic field lines. This action trapped the radiation in place. This man-made ring of energy was far more intense than the natural Van Allen belts. It did not dissipate in days. It remained in orbit for 5 years. Before the next part, we will examine the specific satellites that this artificial belt destroyed. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now. The next reveal will show how this test blinded the United States military during the height of the Cold War. You need to be here for this. But that is not what stopped people cold. The second sub-revelation involved the destruction of early space infrastructure. The high-energy electrons tore through the solar panels of nearby satellites. Within weeks, the radiation disabled Ariel 1, the first British satellite. It also damaged Telstar 1, the famous American communications satellite that handled the first live television broadcasts across the Atlantic Ocean. The very tools meant to connect the modern world were fried by the weapon meant to protect it. In total, 1/3 of all active satellites in low Earth orbit ceased to function. Dr. Donald Kessler, a former NASA scientist who spent decades studying orbital debris and hazards, concluded that the 1962 test proved how fragile our space environment is. He stated that a single event can compromise the orbital pathways we rely on for global communication. And then came the passage no one expected. Declassified document from the Defense Atomic Support Agency showed that the military did not expect this level of destruction. They planned a small experiment. They created a global crisis. The electromagnetic pulse traveled down the Earth's magnetic lines all the way to New Zealand. It burned out electronic equipment thousands of miles from the blast zone. The United States accidentally damaged the infrastructure of its own allies. The third finding is the one that changed everything. The high-altitude explosion did not just create radiation. It tore a temporary hole in the ionosphere. This action disrupted long-range radio communications across the Pacific Ocean for days. Ships could not contact land. Airplanes flew blind without radar support. The military realized that their weapon effectively blinded their own command systems. They could not see a Soviet counterattack if one occurred during the blackout. Consider a direct quote from a 1962 joint military report. It stated, "The electron intensity remained higher than normal by a factor of 100 for months, changing our complete understanding of the inner magnetosphere." Think about how this mirrors our world today. We now live in an era of satellite-dependent life. Your GPS, your banking systems, and your weather tracking rely on the safety of low Earth orbit. In 1962, a few men in a room risked that entire future for a military experiment. Today, we see private companies launching tens of thousands of satellites into the exact same space. The threat is no longer nuclear tests. The threat is commercial crowding. Does this sound like a story from 60 years ago? Or does it sound like a warning for this week? The same reckless drive to conquer a new frontier exists today. The actors change, but the behavior remains identical. The military try to own the sky. They ended up showing how easily it breaks. For thousands of years, humans looked up and saw the same stars. The night sky felt permanent. It felt safe. But on that night in 1962, humanity learned that our actions can reach beyond our world. We learned that we can break things we do not understand. You have felt this. Most people have felt this at least once. It is a sudden realization that the systems protecting us are incredibly fragile. We trust that the people in charge know what they're doing. We assume there's a plan. The documents reveal that there was no plan for the day after. The scientists did not know the radiation would stay. They did not know the satellites would die. They simply wanted to see if they could do it. They treated the upper atmosphere like a laboratory floor. Think about the hotel worker on that terrace in Honolulu. He looked up at a bleeding sky. He felt a deep, quiet helplessness. The natural order of his world vanished in a millisecond. It was replaced by a green flash and a dead city. That feeling is the real cost of these tests. It is the loss of trust. When a government burns the sky, it tells its people that nothing is sacred. It tells them that even the stars are a target. The men who pressed that button did not ask permission from the world. They just took the sky. Most people have felt the gap between the safety they were promised and the risks that are actually taken with our future. If this is landing for you, you are not alone. And you are not wrong to question it. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are with this. Governments hide actions for 3 specific reasons. Every reason links to institutional preservation. The first reason was strategic vulnerability. The United States military realized the blast blinded their own early warning systems. If the Soviet Union launched missiles during the communication blackout, the West would not see them coming. Revealing the full extent of the satellite damage would tell the enemy exactly how to disable American defenses. It was politically untenable to admit that a self-inflicted wound left the nation completely unprotected. The second reason was legal liability. The Outer Space Treaty did not exist yet. It was signed later in 1967 to prevent this exact scenario. In 1962, the United States accidentally destroyed Ariel 1, a satellite belonging to Great Britain, its closest ally. The government kept the specific cause quiet to avoid international lawsuits and diplomatic embarrassment, admitting that an American test destroyed foreign property would jeopardize global alliances during a critical point in the Cold War. The third reason was public panic. The government could not explain why streetlights failed in Hawaii without admitting they lost control of the experiment. They used strategic exclusion. They published reports focusing on the beautiful lights in the sky. They omitted the dead satellites and the trapped radiation. The state needed to maintain the illusion of absolute control. This script relies on independent digital archives. It has no institution to protect, no reputation to defend. It was asked a question. It surfaced a pattern. The data shows that the test was not a triumph of science. It was a massive calculation error. Consider the Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1963. President John F. Kennedy signed this document just 1 year after Starfish Prime. The treaty banned nuclear explosions in the atmosphere, in underwater zones, and in outer space. The sudden rush to sign this agreement makes sense only when you look at the damage from July 9, 1962. The leaders of the world saw the data. They realized they almost locked humanity out of low Earth orbit before the space age even began. They did not stop out of moral virtue. They stopped because they terrified themselves. And then came something no one in that room expected. The declassified records contain a specific warning about the future of our upper atmosphere. The data shows that high-energy electrons do not distinguish between a military asset and a civilian tool. Today, we live in a world filled with arenas of modern technology that mirror this exact vulnerability. We do not look at skies lit by nuclear fire, but we rely on a web of thousands of active satellites. These tools manage our daily lives, from global financial transactions to the smart devices in your pocket. A modern disruption would not just turn off streetlights in Honolulu. It would collapse global logistics in minutes. Does this sound like it was written 60 years ago? Or does it sound like something from this week? These words were copied by hand into military archives by men who had no concept of global internet networks or satellite navigation. Yet, they predicted the exact vulnerability we face today. They proved that human infrastructure is always more fragile than human ambition. But this history does not end in darkness. The legacy of Starfish Prime is not just a story of a broken sky. It is a story of what happened next. The terror of that night forced rival nations to sit at the same table. It led directly to the preservation of space as a peaceful domain for decades. The man-made radiation belt eventually faded, and the atmosphere healed itself. The sky returned to its natural state, carrying a quiet promise that human errors can be corrected before they become permanent. The next part is the reason this video exists. This video covered the hidden fallout of Starfish Prime and how a single midnight blast compromised low Earth orbit. But it raised a question that goes deeper. Who made the final decision to risk our upper atmosphere? And what happened in the classified meetings before the launch? That is what the next video answers. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video reveals the leaked transcript from the 1962 presidential briefings that completely change our understanding of Cold War space policy. The United States military pushed the limits of planetary physics to gain a strategic advantage over the Soviet Union. Drop your answer below. Do you believe the scientific data gained from Starfish Prime justified the permanent environmental risks? I read every comment. This one is going to split the room. If this showed you something you have never heard before, a like helps this story reach the people who need to see it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video goes directly into the secret 1958 project named Project Argus. We will examine the 3 unpublicized nuclear blasts that the military detonated over the South Atlantic Ocean. You will not want to miss it.